Hello, this is the final day in our last set of sessions. I hope that you've learned a lot over these 3 days of our conference, and hope you're able to take this back with you and apply it to your job and do your job better in the future. Our next speaker is Dennis Hayes. He's the president of Bullitt Foundation. As president of that foundation, he leads an effort to mold major cities in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia into models of sustainability. That foundation applies ecological principles to the design of healthy, resilient human ecosystems. Under his leadership, the foundation designed and constructed the Bullitt Center. It's the world's greenest office building, which it operates as a commercial enterprise. Dennis was the principal national organizer of the first Earth Day in 1970, and he took the event international in 1990. It is now the most widely observed secular holiday in the world. As the board chair for the International Earth Day Network, Dennis is gearing up for the 50th Earth Day this year. Over the years, he has been the special assistant to the governor of Illinois for natural resources and the environment, senior fellow at the World Watch Institute, adjunct professor of engineering and human biology at Stanford University, and Regents Professor at the University of California. He's been a visiting scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C., and at the Bellagio Center in Italy, and at the Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow for the Bosch Foundation. During the Carter administration, he was the director of CERI, which was renamed the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. He served on dozens of governing boards, including those at Stanford University, the World Resources Institute, Federation of American Scientists, and the Energy Foundation. He has numerous awards. He's also been selected by Time Magazine as one of its heroes of the planet. He has been profiled as Newsmaker of the Week by ABC News and as today's Person of the News by the New York Times. He's going to talk today about megatrends and looking about where energy is in the future and its place in the future. And so it's something that we can all be able to listen to and see how he applies it and learn more from that. It'll be followed by questions and answers so that you guys can get involved and get engaged with him to be able to discuss. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dennis Hayes to the stage.
Well, thank you very much for those kind remarks, Buster. It's a pleasure to be here with you. In the United States, residential and commercial buildings account for about 3/4 of all electricity use, about 40% of all primary energy use, and roughly 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. There are some huge opportunities in other sectors, obviously, transportation, industry, agriculture, but buildings, I think, offer the lowest hanging fruit. And with a handful of notable exceptions, that fruit is mostly not being harvested. Over the last 25 years, the building sector in this nation as a whole has improved from pathetically lousy to sort of embarrassingly mediocre. And most of that improvement has been due not to leadership within the sector, but to energy codes, appliance efficiency standards, and federal lighting requirements. At the Bullitt Foundation, we set out a decade ago on an incredibly ambitious project to design and build the greenest office building in the world at no more than the median cost of Class A office buildings. It was to be the first commercial structure to meet the Living Building Challenge. It was to be a 6-story building that is net energy positive in the cloudiest major city in the contiguous 48 states. I emphasize 6-story because you harvest sunshine almost exclusively on the roof, and the roof is the same whether you're 1 story or 50 stories. 6 stories in most places, if you're trying to be energy self-sufficient on site, is probably about the limit. And in fact, 7 years after we opened the Bullitt Center, I believe we are still the only 6-story entirely self-sufficient solar-powered building in the world. It's net zero carbon, net zero water, using only rainfall, recycles its gray water, used only FSC certified wood, contains 0 toxic materials, compost its human waste to make a soil enhancer. These were all stretch goals. A new office building in Seattle built to current energy codes with conventional tenants would have an EUI in the low 50s. A LEED platinum building might drive that down as far as the low 30s. In order to keep our total energy use below our annual production from rooftop solar, we had to have an EUI of no more than 15. One very green real estate developer told me that he was confident it would be impossible to drive our tenants' plug loads down to 15, much less also operate the building under that. And in fact, when I discussed our plans with a half a dozen leading real estate developers, every single one said that this would be impossible to do at any price, much less at a competitive price. Well, for 7 years now, we've been fully tenanted and operating in the black. The bank that had initially valued the center at only $11 million, looking at our blueprints and what we were aspiring to do with what it characterized as a combination of science fair projects, increased that appraised value from 11 million up to 33 million for purposes of permanent financing after we've been operating for a few years. We have just completed a video that walks you through some of the features of the Bullitt Center. Well, let's take a look.
Welcome everyone to the Bullitt Center. My name is Deborah Sigler. I work here at the Bullitt Center for the University of Washington Center for Integrated Design. And in partnership with the Bullitt Foundation, for the past 7 years, I've had the privilege of being the center's tour program coordinator. Before we get started touring the Bullitt Center, I want to take a moment and introduce you to the Bullitt Foundation, a private philanthropy started by Dorothy Bullitt in 1952 with a mission to fund civic projects here in the Pacific Northwest. In 1992, the foundation hired Dennis Hayes to be the president of the foundation, and it was under his leadership the Bullitt Foundation's mission narrowed its focus to invest in programs that safeguard the natural environment, advancing principles of ecology as they apply to human beings and to human communities throughout the Emerald Corridor. As we approach the Bullitt Center from McGillivray Park, I want to frame this 15-minute tour around a central question or thought. What if a building could restore the ecology of a place? What if it could act like a Douglas fir forest? What if humans could design, build, and operate their built environments so that they abided by the same principles that govern the natural world? What would that look like? Well, thanks to an extraordinary integrated design team that included architects from Miller Hall, a Seattle-based architecture firm, PAE, a Portland-based mechanical and electrical engineering firm, Schuchart, a full-service commercial general contractor, and Biohabits for their work on the building's water infrastructure design, we have the Bullitt Center, living proof that we can design, build, and operate our built environments so that they restore the earth and inspire ecological stewardship. The Bullitt Center has been heralded as the greenest commercial office building in the world, a model of true sustainability, a building in complete balance with nature. A certified living building, the Bullitt Center sits in the middle of Seattle, in a dense urban neighborhood. But before the city existed, this area was a Douglas fir forest. As a model of regenerative design, the Bullitt Center was created to mimic the functions of the forest. So let's explore how this happens in a 6-story, 50,000 square foot commercial office building. Just like a forest, the Bullitt Center takes care of all of its energy needs from a clean, renewable source on site, the sun. Starting our tour on the top of the building, we're looking out at the building's canopy, a 14,000 square foot solar array designed to produce 100% on-site renewable energy for the Bullitt Center. This system generates approximately 245,000 kilowatt hours of energy annually. For the past 7 years, the Bullitt Center has produced more energy than it needs on an annual basis, making it net positive energy. And that's amazing, especially when you consider that Seattle is one of the cloudiest major cities in the lower 48 states. You have to wonder, what's up, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Miami, Boston, Chicago, or even Denver? If net positive energy buildings can be developed in Seattle, they can be developed anywhere. Like the leaves or needles of a tree, the panels convert solar radiation into energy that is used to meet all the building's energy needs. Excess energy produced flows easily to the grid. In other words, the Bullitt Center is net metered. When the building was developed in 2013, the SunPower panels used were the most efficient solar panels commercially available. With 575 panels on the roof, the Bullitt Center relies only on clean, renewable energy, with zero combustion of any type in the building. This is critical if we hope to achieve deep decarbonization of our built environment by 2040. The Bullitt Center uses ground source heat pumps to transfer heat energy from 26 400-foot deep geothermal wells to the building's radiant floor heating and cooling system. This system also provides heat energy used to warm the building's domestic hot water supply and to condition fresh air coming into the building from 2 rooftop heat recovery ventilators. A fully automated, operable window system naturally ventilates and cools the Bullitt Center during the hot summer months. Together with night flushing, the building uses an automated exterior blind system to help keep the temperatures inside comfortable year-round. So again, like the forest, the Bullitt Center is constantly responding and adjusting to its surrounding weather conditions. Also, like a forest, the Bullitt Center must take care of all of its water needs and systems on site, net zero water. In the Bullitt Center, there are 3 distinct water systems. Potable water, that's the water used in showers, dishwashers, and sinks. Gray water, that's the dirty water that goes down the drain after you've used the shower, dishwasher, or sink. And black water, that's the poop, pee, and toilet paper deposited in the building's toilets and urinals. 100% of potable water comes from treated rainwater. Rain falls on the building's canopy, drips onto the roof, and follows a drain spout into a 56,000-gallon rainwater cistern located in the basement. From the rooftop canopy to the basement, here we're standing in front of the rain to potable water treatment system. Behind the plywood wall is a concrete wall, one of 4 that makes up a 950 square foot room with a capacity of 56,000 gallons. Water treatment starts when captured rainwater from the cistern passes through a series of carbon filters, the smallest being half a micron. Filtered water is disinfected with ultraviolet light to ensure it is clean and safe. Finally, it is treated with a small amount of chlorine to ensure it remains safe throughout its journey to the faucets, where it is used by building occupants. Now, chlorine was a hotly debated topic at the Bullitt Center because it is a chemical on the International Living Future Institute's Material Red List. The project team originally tried to keep chlorine out of the building, but after much research and discussion with regulatory bodies, we all agreed chlorine was important to protect public health and ensure the project meets the requirements of the Safe Drinking Water Act. Moving on, next, the gray water treatment system. After water is used in the building's sinks, showers, and dishwashers, it goes down a drain and is captured in a 500-gallon gray water cistern before it is filtered and pumped to a 3rd floor rooftop constructed wetlands. The next stop is the 3rd floor rooftop constructed wetlands. Irrigation pipes buried beneath a bed of gravel, shale, and horsetail plants allow gray water to infiltrate the constructed wetlands. Water that does not evaporate or is not evapotranspired by the plants is released into a rain garden and bioswale at the ground level, effectively recharging the aquifer underground. Our analysis shows approximately 2/3 of the rain that falls on the roof ultimately returns to the soil, which is similar to the infiltration rate for a Douglas fir forest. And in this way, the Bullitt Center is helping to reconnect the local hydrologic cycle. In keeping with our Doug fir forest metaphor, when needles fall off the trees, they land on the ground and decompose. The Bullitt Center composts its droppings too. Our next stop is back to the basement. The Bullitt Center currently uses a composting toilet system to treat the building's black water. Waterless urinals and foam flush toilets deliver poop, pee, and toilet paper to 10 aerobic composters. 4 adjacent tanks collect the system's liquid byproduct, leachate as it's known, is regularly taken off-site, treated aerobically, filtered and disinfected with UV light to create Class A reclaimed water, which is released into a nearby wetlands called the Chinook Bend. To ensure public health is protected, the human biosolids produced in the composters are taken to a nearby company called Seattle Sawdust and Supply, where they are used to make a field-ready compost called GrowCo. This soil amendment is sold to landscapers and homeowners to use on vegetable gardens and lawn maintenance. Next stop on our tour is the irresistible stairway. As a child, I loved climbing trees. The view from up in the branches never got old. In the Bullitt Center, climbing the irresistible stairway is like climbing a tree. Composed of Doug fir treads, the stairway offers some of the best views in the building. The stairway was designed to be the first thing people see when they enter the building. This positioning was intended to draw people up the stairs, using a large, open feeling and expansive views to encourage its use. In addition to creating opportunities for healthy physical activity, this strategy helps reduce electricity use from the elevator while promoting health. Of course, the Bullitt Center does have an elevator, and it is in full compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. But for people who are able to use the stairs, we made the experience similar to the feeling of climbing up into a tall tree. Speaking of climbing trees and climbing stairs, our next stop is up to the 6th floor, where we can appreciate the mass timber structure of the building. Like a tree, the Bullitt Center is made from wood. When it comes from a responsibly managed forest, wood can be the most sustainable building material. In the case of the Bullitt Center, Douglas fir dimensional lumber was used in the floor assemblies, which are nail-laminated 2x6 boards that span 10 feet. The structural columns and beams are made from Doug fir glue-laminated timbers, or glue-lams as they are known. 100% of the wood used in the Bullitt Center is Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC as you may know it, certified, meaning the forests were protected even as the building relied on wood. In the Northwest, conventional industrial forestry relies heavily on large clear-cuts and highly hazardous pesticides sprayed from helicopters and airplanes to extract as much economic value from the forest as possible. This approach can degrade ecological health and cause problems for people and wildlife. The Forest Stewardship Council requires forest managers to protect habitat for wildlife, avoid harvesting rare old-growth forest, tightly restrict use of hazardous chemicals, and leave larger buffers along waterways. All of this and more results in better environmental and social outcomes. By using a mass timber structure, the Bullitt Center reduced the embodied carbon in construction materials, which was a critical concern for the project team and a strong rationale for using wood. Plus, wood looks beautiful, brings biophilic benefits, and is a regionally appropriate material in the Pacific Northwest. Doug fir forests do not contain hazardous chemicals, and neither does the Bullitt Center. Across more than 1,000 products, the project team screened out more than 350 chemicals such as PVC, cadmium, lead, mercury, and hormone-mimicking substances that are known to cause human and environmental harm. This list is referred to as the Red List. We conclude the tour back on the 2nd floor of the Bullitt Center. Rather than leave the building through the main entrance, I want to take you out through the building's garage so that you can experience what a 21st century parking garage looks like. In addition to high-performance building, sustainable design also encourages high-performance humans. The Bullitt Center not only relies on energy from the ground and sky, but also from the occupants. Set in a central, walkable neighborhood, the Bullitt Center is in a prime location to be accessed by bicycle, as well as foot or transit. The Bullitt Center provides no on-site parking for single occupancy vehicles, instead housing 29 bicycles. Like a Douglas fir forest, the Bullitt Center gets its energy from the sun, its water from the rain. It contains no hazardous chemicals, composts its waste, uses wood for its structure, and it's beautiful. As a model of regenerative design, the Bullitt Center was developed to show what's possible and to demonstrate that the built environment can reconnect long broken ecological cycles. In doing so, the Bullitt Center is helping to restore its site, and by sharing this story, we hope to inspire others to do the same where they live, work, and play. As we conclude the tour, I'd like to leave you with words by Amanda Sturgeon, former CEO of the International Living Future Institute. Before you start your next project and try to cram in every sustainable strategy that you can muster, take a step outside and just ask, what would nature do? For more information about the Bullitt Center, please visit bullittcenter.org. This video was produced by the University of Washington Center for Integrated Design in partnership with the Bullitt Foundation. The University of Washington Center for Integrated Design's mission is to advance both public and professional awareness and support for construction of more high-performance buildings. And to this end, we conduct tours of the Bullitt Center. In-person tours focus on the building's unique integrated design and resource conservation systems, providing participants a view into the future of urban sustainability. For more information about the work we do and the tours we provide, visit our website at www.idlseattle.com.
Dennis, we want to first thank you for joining us today, for your comments, for the work you've done. So I think we're honored to have you today. I don't think it's a stretch to say that you're certainly probably a legend in our industry for the decades of environmental work you've done throughout, and certainly for being cool before being green before it was cool to be green. So we want to thank you for all you've done and for environmental causes and to make the planet a better place for both us and future generations. You know, I was looking at the video of the Bullitt Center.
Well, I was just going to say, and thank you very much for slapping in just before this segment for a few seconds there, the November 3rd Vote Earth platform. That's a wonderful little bit of propaganda that was almost subliminal in your messaging there.
Great. And I know we said you're preparing for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, but I think that was a couple of months back. So congratulations on the 50th anniversary of that. You know, certainly was very impressive, the video of the Bullitt Center. I was fortunate to be visiting the Candida building down on campus at Georgia Tech here in Atlanta, and quite an impressive facility also, and incorporating many of the same principles I think that the Bullitt Center has, and you know, as part of a living building. So we've got a lot of questions coming in. We'll get right to those. So the first question is the goal of the Bullitt Center is to drive change in the marketplace faster and further by showing what's possible today. So since it was opened on Earth Day in 2013, I think you may have alluded to, are we making progress? Are we not making enough progress? What are some of the barriers to seeing more living buildings and more progress in green commercial buildings?
Well, of course, our ambitions were enormously high, and we would have loved to have had hundreds of thousands of buildings out there now. There are dozens, and they tend to be mostly in academic institutions like the Candida building. The second large commercial structure, and in fact it'll be a few thousand square feet larger than we are, is going to be breaking ground in Portland, Oregon later this year. And candidly, having two of them over the course of 7 years is vastly less than we had hoped for. There are lots of reasons for this. In part, it is driven by economic factors, the conservatism of the banking industry, the risk averseness of a very, very fragmented building development community. We've got really creative architects, but they have great difficulty getting someone to actually put up the money to execute those ideas.
Excellent, excellent. So more questions coming in. Here's one from a colleague and associate in South Africa joining us. So the solar panels on the Bullitt Center, I think two things. I'll interject one question myself. So what were the holes on the top? Were those panels that were broken or damaged? What was that? And then secondly, Peter Schindler asked, do they need to be cleaned? If so, how often? And what's the process for cleaning?
Sure, two good questions. Many people think that those holes are to let rainwater get through in order to keep our water system going, but in fact, rain has no trouble at all going into the little spaces, even the quarter-inch spaces between the panels as they're mounted. Those holes have skylights underneath them. So if you're trying to get as much light as possible into a room, you can have a solar panel that captures sunlight and converts it into electricity at about 20%, and then you can have an LED that perhaps very efficiently converts that electricity back into light at maybe as much as 85 or 90%, at which point you're getting maybe 18% of the energy that was in the sunlight as light in the room. If instead you don't have the solar panel there and it just comes in through a skylight, you're getting 100% of that light going directly into the room. So it is a much more efficient way to proceed. The cleaning issue is one of those few places where, being in a fairly rainy climate, we have an advantage. We only clean the photovoltaic arrays one time a year, and that's more than sufficient to keep them operating at a very high efficiency rate.
Oh, great. Thanks for that. So another question, what was the cost of the Bullitt Center, and how does that compare with other Class A office buildings in Seattle?
Well, when you're looking at bullet costs, at building costs, there are a couple of things. One, much of this information is very closely held by developers, but we were able to pull out some things, and it appears to us that the median cost today of building a Class A office space in Seattle is about $400 a square foot. We came in at about $360 a square foot 7 years ago, so we were very competitive right from the start. And today we're actually able to lease our space for less than a new building would lease its space for, and still come in with the same rate of return on investment. It's important because there are sometimes confusing numbers thrown around for all kinds of reasons in land development. And that's one of them, for example, is the cost of land. If we had sited the Bullitt building 12 blocks to the west, our land would have cost us 10 times as much, and we would have had to have put probably a 40-story building to make it pan out. If we'd gone 12 blocks to the east, we might have gotten the land for 1/5 as much, but we'd be in an area that's zoned residential. So we just sort of exclude land costs from these estimates, and like everyone else does. But the cost per square foot is in the range of $360, $365 a square foot, which is very competitive in Seattle.
Oh, that is very competitive. That's very impressive. So just to follow on, I'd like to ask about that. We're certainly in the middle of the global pandemic, and obviously, there's health benefits, climate benefits, with all of the energy benefits at the Bullitt Center. Have you tried to, or have you quantified, the health and the climate benefits, and tried to utilize that as a part of, promotion, attracting and retaining tenants?
Well, as it turns out, it's most people that move into the Bullitt Foundation didn't know the year before they were going to move into the Bullitt Foundation that they'd be doing that, so they weren't keeping all of those health records for people because it's not commonly done as a business practice. We do have some anecdotal suggestions that the abundance of fresh air, the automatically opening windows at various times, the daylighting of the building all creates, we think, a healthier environment, and we're confident a more upbeat and optimistic and energetic environment. The lighting that you're exposed to basically everywhere in the Bullitt Center is the lighting that we evolved to expect. The sun's sending different wavelengths in early in the morning and late at night than it is in the middle of the day when it's right above the building going through somewhat less atmosphere than it does at other times. And all of that and the diurnal cycles seem to be creating just a sense of well-being. In Seattle in particular, a great many people have what is called seasonal affective disorder. It's a wave of depression that comes from being under slate gray skies. But people in the Bullitt Center, basically that always disappears. And so people come in who've been almost incapacitated by this in some of their previous buildings. And because they're exposed directly to daylighting for more than 90% of the lighting in the Bullitt Center, that's certainly a health benefit.
Certainly is, certainly is. So here's a follow-on question. Have you had any difficulty attracting or retaining tenants? Is there a line out the door of people wanting to be housed in the Bullitt Center?
There has been right from the beginning. We were fully tenanted within 3 months of the time that we commissioned the building, and it's been fully tenanted ever since. And as soon as someone moves out, there's always a line of folks willing to come in. Right at the moment, we've got 2 new tenants coming in. A beneficial state bank is taking over retail at the ground floor, and an environmental digital magazine that is the most viewed magazine among people around the world, I believe. Certainly in the United States, between 18 and 35 on environmental things, called Grist, is also taking over a big chunk of space. So yeah, there's I should say, having said that we have tried to prove the concept now over the last 7 years that this can work as a commercial building. And so we've had a lot of commercial tenants. Some of your audience will know Sonos wireless speakers. We were one of the 3 United States offices for the Sonos Corporation. We have Intentional Futures. PAE opened up a Seattle office, and they're housed in the building. So they are just straightforward commercial tenants. Having proven that and having made the economic case, we are now edging more toward our mission as a foundation of encouraging environmental activism. And as tenants leave the building, they will be replaced by public interest organizations to whom we are able to offer the space at very meaningfully less than commercial space elsewhere. So it will be an ongoing subsidy, maybe for as much as 250 years into the future if the building actually meets its design life.
Wow, very long life. That's very good and impressive. So you mentioned environmental activism. So we have several hundred energy engineers, sustainability managers, et cetera, listening and participating in our virtual conference. So what would you advise and encourage them to do to ensure that we continue not only to save or avoid energy use, but also to do things to promote a more healthy planet going forward?
Well, I suppose the principal advice is always to push harder. There's a tendency of people to come up with good creative ideas, and then they get, if in the terms of real estate, for people working in the built environment, value engineered out. And so you've got something that's, if it functions as it's originally designed, something that will be just an extraordinarily successful building, but it turns out 2 or 3 of those features are relatively costly, and the developer will say, you got to yank those out. And then that dramatically diminishes a number of other benefits that would have come synergistically if they'd been allowed to interact with the rest of the building. So push hard for what you can do. And I guess I would encourage a great many engineers to, at some point mid-career, think about not spending most of your days engineering, but moving on to something else where you are not working for somebody else, but getting other people to work for you. I know when I was teaching at Stanford, we did a survey and found that among people that had master's degrees in engineering, 5 years out from the university, most of them were not mostly doing engineering anymore. They moved into management. And the simple fact is the folks who control the money, the folks who control the ultimate decisions, are ultimately going to be able to let you know whether you'll be able to meet and achieve your dreams or not. And I'd encourage those that are devoted to that kind of mission to seize the opportunities as they present themselves. I mean, speaking for myself, I'm a real estate developer who's developed a total of 1 building. But it was important to me to actually convince myself that this combination of science experiments actually, honest to goodness, could work.
Great advice. Thanks. Here's a question. So from Bill Stein, Can we build a net zero carbon neutral building with no city water in Tucson, Arizona?
Hmm. Yeah, the no city water thing will be the difficulty in Tucson, obviously. I don't, you can do it. The real question, how big can it be and how many stories can it be? I think in almost every place in the United States for any kind of a standard commercial building, even in a place with as little rainfall as Tucson, if you've got a good enough cistern, big enough cistern to save it from when it rains to when it's not raining, you'll be able to meet the needs of a one-story building or a two-story building. In Tucson, and I'm just operating off of a hunch here, it would be difficult to do it for much more than a two-story building. It's just not that much moisture falling on the roof.
Perfect. So here's another question. Did you have any local utility help financing your investments in deep energy, deep efficiency, sorry?
Hmm. Yeah, the local utility has a really fascinating program that it's the only one now in the world that is using. It's called Energy Efficiency as a Service. And while it did not provide upfront cash to us, it provides ongoing operating cash that made the whole building pencil out better. And we were prepared to invest the money because we could see the return on investment. It is a little bit wonky. If anyone is really interested in this, I would be happy to send you a paper. The really fast version of it is that we had a perfect right to build a building that would meet the energy code of Seattle. And Seattle City Light would have been obligated to provide us with all the electricity that is needed to meet such a building's needs. Instead, we built a building that uses about 1/4 as much electricity per square foot as it would if it were built to code. So that could have been something where Seattle City Light then has much less revenue because it's selling us, only 1/4 as much electricity. Our tenants did not make any investment at all into the daylighting and the other features that allowed us to drive down the energy use. And yet they're getting the benefit of a more comfortable building, a more productive building, a better lit building. And so what Seattle is doing is charging them for the amount of electricity that they would have used if the building had been built to code, because they get all of the benefits. It's energy services. You don't care about electricity. You care about lighting, you care about comfort, you care about productivity. They've got all of those. So they pay for what they would have paid in each of their monthly bills if we built the building to code. Seattle City Light then is able to take some stuff off the top of that for metering and a little bit more just to compensate themselves for their work in it, and returns a bunch of that money then to us each month for the savings that we're making in the building. That turns out to be a hugely important economic factor, and it's an approach that Seattle is now expanding to a couple of dozen other buildings of all different types, and that I hope is ultimately going to be expanded to all buildings. And I think it makes so much sense that it really ought to be rapidly sent around the world. There's this problem constantly that no tenant wants to invest in somebody else's building to make it more efficient, and yet the tenants pay the energy bills in virtually every commercial building, and the builders are disinclined to spend more money building to save energy bills for their tenants. And the amazing irrational thing is the tenants will not pay more for their leases because the building is more efficient. And what Seattle has done is come up with a way to solve all of those problems simultaneously with this energy efficiency as a service.
Great, thanks. Here's an easy one. Does the rainwater system have extra capacity to sell to other nearby buildings?
No, and rain will fluctuate from year to year, but I think we would run into a bit of difficulty with Seattle Public Utilities if we tried to sell any surplus water some year to someone else. And it would be sufficiently small and the plumbing would be sufficiently complicated that it probably wouldn't be worth doing. The whole thing was designed to be self-sufficient as a structure, and that's pretty much all we get. We do produce surplus electricity that we sell into the grid, but we don't produce surplus.
Okay, great. So, and I think we're about out of time. One more question here, a final question. We're going to change it up just a little bit and go back a little bit to, in 2015, yourself and your wife Gail in the book Cowed, and it said that eating 1 pound of beef products produces a greater carbon footprint than burning a gallon of gasoline. So, that's still environmental, taking care of the planet. Is that still the case? Have we made any progress? And how do you see, synthetic or lab produced beef progressing, and are we getting near that?
Hmm. Simple question with complicated answers. One, of course, we're now seeing this Tesla-inspired surge toward electric vehicles, which changes a lot of those calculations into the future if you're talking about mobility. I think every major automobile manufacturer in the world by the end of next year will have at least one model, and several of them will have many models of electric vehicles available. Second, what is happening with regard to plant-based meat substitutes is still a matter of a little bit of controversy. Many of them are not particularly organic. Their carbon footprints are being debated. I actually think there is enormous promise there. Whether it has been realized with the current two companies that are competing for market share or not, I just don't have enough knowledge about it to be able to say. I will say, though, that the huge difference with conventional beef all has to do with feedlots that are feeding them number 2 dent corn to fatten them up. That is where the huge environmental impact comes, is growing all of this corn and producing the enormous amount of waste and the flatulence that's associated with those stockyards, and the inherent cruelty that is part of it as well, and the fact that you're producing meat that really is fat. And although we place a premium and charge more for fat beef, it's much less healthy for people, to the extent that the cows are not just grass-fed, which is commonly said, that but all cows are grass-fed for the first year or two of their lives, but grass-finished. You are then buying beef that has a vastly lower carbon footprint and is much better for you than conventional beef.
Great. Thanks for that. So let me once again say it's certainly been an honor and a privilege having you join us today. I want to thank you for all the work you've done, congratulate you on, the 50th anniversary since you organized the first Earth Day, and to wish you all much success, health, and happiness in the future. And once again, thanks for all you've done, and thanks for joining the AEE West event here today.
Thanks for giving me a chance to join you, Bill. It was a pleasure.
Thanks. Okay, and with that, we'll move right along to the next segment of the closing plenary. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ultramise Roberts Tompkins, and I am a senior engineer with Toyota Motor North America Environmental Sustainability. I am also a current CWEL board member, where I currently serve over the programs and events. I am here to introduce you today to Mona Tierney-Lloyd. Mona has been involved in energy policy development for over 25 years in the United States, with an emphasis on Western states, including Texas. She began her work as a petroleum engineer, working for an oil and gas exploration company in Western Pennsylvania. She has worked for a natural gas distribution company in New Jersey and in an electric and gas distribution company in Southern California. Since that time, she has been an advocate working on gas and electricity industry restructuring and retail access. For the last 11 years, she worked for Internet, Demand Response, working with regulatory commissions, legislatures, and organized markets to create opportunities for demand-side resources. Now, with NREL North America, she is responsible for creating or protecting utility-scale renewable development, hybrid projects that include energy storage, and customer-sided resources that could include demand response, energy storage, solar, and electric vehicle charging. Mona is chair of the board of the California Energy Storage Alliance, is a board member for the Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Technologies, member of Leadership Council for the Energy Storage Association, former chair of the Demand Side Working Group in ERCOT, former co-chair of the Energy Committee, Silicon Valley Leadership Group. She has a BS in Petroleum Engineering from Penn State University. So without further ado, I present to you Mona Tierney-Lloyd.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mona Tierney-Lloyd. I'm really happy to be with you here today at the Association of Energy Engineers. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you. And I also want to thank my longtime friend, Laurie Wiegand Jackson, who invited me. I'm going to talk with you about a few things, just a little bit about who I am. I know I was just introduced, but a little about my background story, a little bit about the company I'm working for, which is Enel North America. Talking about this moment in time, both socially and from an energy perspective. And then I'll talk about carbon policy, some of the technology developments, and what's next. So a little bit more about myself. I grew up in Pittsburgh, outside of Pittsburgh and in a suburb. I lived there all my life until I went to college at Penn State, but just wanted to highlight some of the things that happened along the way that brought me to this place of being in the energy industry and really working towards advancing clean energy technologies. So growing up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that was the steel capital of the United States until it wasn't. And while I was graduating from high school and college, the steel industry was basically in significant decline, really tough economic times for the city of Pittsburgh. But it was pretty much a city that was built on one industry, and that was the steel industry. I went to Penn State. I graduated with a degree in petroleum and natural gas engineering, obviously a little different from the kind of work I'm doing today, but certainly introduced me to the energy sector. And when I graduated, I also graduated at a time when the energy sector, especially the petroleum industry, was in significant decline. And so I moved to New Jersey and began to work at an natural gas utility, which is Elizabethtown Gas Company, which is where I met Laurie. And one of the fun things, in addition to working at that company, was I played on the company softball team with a bunch of women that worked at that company. But while I was at Elizabethtown Gas Company, the natural gas industry was restructuring. So pipelines became open carriers of natural gas, and natural gas utilities were looking at how to provide open access to customers who wanted to procure their natural gas supplies from others. And then I made a pretty big move. I moved to San Diego and started working with San Diego Gas and Electric, and worked with them on natural gas restructuring there. But as a combined utility, gas and electric, I kind of moved from that position to the Big E, Enron. I worked with them for 6 years, just about, until, of course, their collapse. But while I worked there, I worked on natural gas and electricity restructuring. So opening the transmission and distribution systems to alternative suppliers. After Enron collapsed, I moved to Constellation Energy and worked on direct access and retail access for commercial and industrial customers fairly uneventfully at that time. And then I moved over to Enron and started to work on demand side issues with demand response and integrating demand response into wholesale markets, and worked on the Supreme Court case, which was a pivotal decision about whether or not behind the meter resources, primarily demand response, but I would suggest all behind the meter resources, could participate in wholesale markets on a comparable basis as other types of resources generators, for example. So that was a significant event. And then Enel purchased Enernoc. And at the same time Enel purchased Enernoc, they purchased a couple of other companies in the behind the meter space, including eMotorworks for electric vehicle charging, and then Demand Energy, which was providing behind the meter battery storage. So I think you can see in my personal career, there was an evolution from fossil fuels to cleaner behind the meter resources. And I think many of us have been on that journey. So just a little bit about Enel. They are a global energy company. We have two operating arms in North America, which is Enel X, which focuses on the behind the meter energy services, and Enel Green Power, which provides utility scale wind and solar and energy storage development. And we also have Enel Trading North America. So actually three business arms. But we're a global energy company, the #1 network operator. So we are utility in several other parts of the world, including Europe and South America. We're the world's largest private player in renewables. So we have 46 gigawatts of renewable capacity. And we're a large retail base worldwide. We have 73 million customers worldwide. As you can see, there's 6.3 gigawatts of demand response. ENERNOC and now Enel are the largest demand response providers. So it's a very large, diversified global energy company. And what we're trying to do in this role is to open up energy to more people, connect them to utility systems, provide them access to new technologies, provide services, on-site services to manage those technologies, bring new technologies to markets such as electric vehicle charging, and then partner with other providers in this space. So this is the moment that we're in. Obviously, we're recording this. I'm working from home. All of us, if not most of us, are working remotely and have been for several months. We all are feeling the impacts of many things that are happening simultaneously in this moment in time. COVID is one example. Climate change is another. But there are many social issues that are also rising to the surface at this moment, including Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement. And I don't see these as separate incidences. I see these as combined incidences because, as has been identified, COVID is impacting communities of color and women disproportionately to white people. Climate change has the potential to impact disadvantaged communities and communities of color. So all of these issues I see as really intersecting. And the question is, how quickly are we going to respond to what these events are telling us? We obviously are in a transition. Is it going to be a radical transition? Is this the new normal? What additional change are we going to see? But there's no doubt in my mind that this is a very pivotal time. And there's this intersection also corresponds to what's happening in the energy sector as well. You know, energy has traditionally been something that large utilities and government has planned. But now there's a democratization of energy that is happening so that customers are making their own decisions about their energy future and their energy management and the types of resources that they want and that they're encouraging government to develop. So again, many changes are happening socially, environmentally, medically, and also in the energy sector. Personally, I think we're at a point of pivot, and that the cliche phrase of the new normal, I don't think we're done with a transition, but we're going to see a lot more change, and I think a lot more of this democratization of energy globally, and especially in the United States. So what is happening with climate change? There has been global response, and so looking at early movement towards this with the Kyoto Protocol, the United States participated but did not ratify that agreement. The Paris Accord, we initially participated, but we later withdrew from that agreement. And, so that's what's happening on the global stage. On the national stage, we had the Supreme Court upholding the EPA's ability to regulate carbon emissions back in June of 2014. The Obama administration initially launched the Clean Power Plan, but that really did not move toward implementation. So at a federal level, we weren't really seeing a lot of progress in terms of adopting climate policy in this country. However, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, did move forward in making some pretty important decisions that may not be directly related to establishing a federal climate policy, but as I mentioned earlier, provided opportunities for these clean resources to participate in wholesale markets on a basis comparable to other generators. And those are important landmark decisions. So in the presence of no national policy on climate, no national policy on greenhouse gas, it's important to take into context what the sources of emissions are and where they come from. And these next couple of slides are coming from the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. Every year they do a data book. Bloomberg provides the analysis and the graphics for this data book. I highly recommend it, but this is one of the charts that are taken from that data book. Essentially what you can see, the red line on the graph on the right represents greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from power generation. And so that's the highest level of greenhouse gas emissions. And then underneath that, you have transportation in yellow. The green are industrial buildings. And then, there's other uses underneath that. So 3 largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States is electric power generation, transportation, and buildings. And what you can see at the power line is starting to dip down for lots of reasons. We all know renewable generation has taken a pretty strong hold in the United States, and there have been other policies that have been put in place at the state level to try to address the trajectory of that curve. But we need some additional policies to also address transportation sector as well as industrial buildings, and those things are starting to take shape as well. So states and some regions have taken on their own initiatives on how to address greenhouse gas emissions. I've been working in California for the last 20 years, so I have familiarity with state policy in California very well, but recognize there's a lot of action that's happening in other places of the country as well. So California has an Air Resources Board that was tasked with implementing greenhouse gas reduction policy that was implemented through AB 32, which established a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions relative to 1990 levels by 2030. And then that legislation was followed by SB 32 in 2014, which increased that reduction level to 40% relative to 1990 levels by 2030. And then 2 other pieces of legislation were moving the renewable portfolio standard forward, which is SB 350, from 33% to 50%, and then doubling energy efficiency savings. And then in 2018, we established a clean energy standard through SB 100, which would result in 100% greenhouse gas free by 2045. And then in the eastern United States, we have RGGI, which is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which has been around since 2009. through a memorandum of understanding through these states to work collaboratively and having auctions of energy emissions and incentives. And RGGI has had some changes in the profile of states that are participating in it, but Pennsylvania and New Jersey are moving back into that organization in the near term. And this is just another chart from the Business Council of Sustainable Energy by Bloomberg that shows that we have a number of states that are taking action to implement clean energy mandates across the United States. So again, in the face of no federal action, states are definitely stepping up to take care of their own state greenhouse gas emissions and their own state energy policies. As I mentioned, transportation is the second highest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. And so we're also seeing several states adopt vehicle fuel economy standards. And so California has had their own fuel economy standards for many years, in fact, decades. And several states have adopted those standards, including Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and several of the northeastern states. And then we're seeing some states like Nevada and Arizona, or I'm sorry, New Mexico, also moving towards adopting energy fuel economy standards for their states as well. So what we've seen is some pretty significant changes in the profile of the resources that are being used to generate electricity over the course of the last 10 years. And we've seen very large uptake of wind and solar resources. For wind, both onshore and now increasingly offshore development of wind resources. For solar, we see utility scale solar developments as well as distributed solar or rooftop solar being very prevalent across the United States and many, many states. Storage has become an increasing part of the mix of energy resources when you look at increasing penetrations of wind and solar. So storage is a great partner to those kinds of resource profiles to provide balancing, to allow for renewable resources actually to be provided over longer periods of time by storing that energy when the solar and wind are generating, and then dispatching that energy at times when those resources are not available to generate. And it can also be used to mitigate the impacts of some curtailment that happens when you have more generation on the system than potentially you have load. So it's a great balancer. It's also a fast responder. And it's being paired directly with wind and solar to provide those hybrid resource benefits that I just described. And on private systems, it provides a microgrid. Energy storage is a very important part of microgrids on customer sites. And then in terms of varieties of energy storage, there are multiple types of energy storage technologies. And in some places, again, California being one example, they're beginning to look at long duration storage, in addition to what is pretty prevalent right now, which is lithium ion, which has about a 4-hour duration. Electric vehicle charging is becoming more prevalent, and electrification of the transportation sector. It's important to have not only customer uptake of purchases of electric vehicles, but also to have transportation charging infrastructure available. It's becoming more prevalent than it has been historically, but there's still a need for some significant build out of that infrastructure. And that's something I expect to see in the near term. And then energy efficiency has been one of the foundational I would say almost resource alternatives. Reduction of energy consumption at the customer premise, making the customer premise more efficient in its energy use, saving customers money, reducing the amount of excess capacity or energy that you need to have on the system. Energy efficiency has been a real stalwart in the the profile of energy services and provides a lot of customer benefits. But it too has some challenges moving forward, but also some opportunities through building electrification. And demand response has been important for reducing those very spiky and usually very dirty peaks on the system that occur with older technologies, coal, etc. We see a lot of that retirement happening on the system, so becoming less dirty, but demand response can really be effective in meeting those peaks, those really spiky peaks. And now we're seeing hydrogen coming onto the scene, including displacement of natural gas and repurposing some natural gas facilities with clean hydrogen. So a really expanded number of resources are available for providing services on the grid. One of the biggest changes has been the economics of solar and wind in particular in competing against fossil fuels in competition for new resource development. And prices for solar and wind have come down significantly. That even solar and wind combined with battery storage is becoming more and more competitive. So you can see from this chart that prices for these resources, not only for purposes of meeting climate goals, but also for economic reasons, they're smart investments. So getting back to energy efficiency, we've seen, you can see some real uptick in different policies, different state policies over time to encourage energy efficiency. Some of it has been through energy efficiency resource standards, and some of it has been through decoupling, which is really important for addressing the impacts of reduced consumption on utility revenue expectations. And then the combination of those two is becoming increasingly common. So, so energy efficiency continues to be an important resource for utilities, but having the right policies in place is important as well through decoupling, as well as through establishing energy efficiency resource standards. And this is just to show how different states and their policies are measured against one another by AEE. This comes out every year. Since I have lived in California forever, I'm always a little bit jealous that we've been #2 behind Massachusetts for a while. But that being what it is, you can see the different factors that go into determining how to rate states and their energy policies in support of energy efficiency. And Massachusetts has, for I believe the last 3 years, been in this #1 position. This is just to show the amount of energy storage deployment that is happening across the United States. There's over 12,000 megawatts of energy storage that's being deployed. California has definitely led the way on this and has over 6 gigawatts of energy storage in service, and expectations through integrated resource planning indicates we could have up to 11 gigawatts out through 2030. So the trajectory for energy storage is very high and is increasingly important across the United States in terms of our energy resource mix. And then here, this is just showing uptick in electric vehicle and fuel cell. This is both fuel cells, battery energy vehicles, as well as plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Uptick in adoption of those resources. Again, expect that trajectory to continue upward like that, but we're seeing a lot of legislation happening across the United States to do things to encourage vehicle adoption, but as well as encouraging build out of charging infrastructure. So what's next? There's a possibility of a national energy standard. We've all heard talk of the Green New Deal, but I think we are in need of having something that would set the course for the nation for clean energy adoption and addressing climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. It's very dependent upon who wins the election in November. I'm not in a position to make any prognostication about that, but let's just say that's one possibility. On the state level, as I've indicated, there's a lot of policy development going on. A lot of states, including Virginia, have set very high clean energy goals for themselves, New York, Massachusetts. So there's plenty of places that are doing that. It's also, once you pass really strong legislation, there's a lot of work that has to be done on the implementation side. That's kind of the nitty-gritty hard work, but it has to be done to meet those goals. And again, having worked in California, I know there's a lot of work that's going on to meet SB 100, and it's not always easy work. But I think the momentum is going in the right direction. Vehicle emissions regulations, we're hoping to see more of that in other states, whether it's the California standard or some other standard, as well as infrastructure build out. Building electrification, I think, is a really kind of a new frontier, and I think it's going to be really important from an energy efficiency standpoint, is transferring all or many buildings, commercial industrial buildings, away from use of natural gas and towards electrification, and then being able to implement more energy efficiency measures on that increased electricity load. And obviously vehicle electrification is going to increase electricity load as well. So being able to manage that in an efficient manner is going to be important. We definitely see deployment of more microgrids, both customer-sided and utility-sided microgrids, and more hybrid resources, both, which is essentially a microgrid, at the utility scale too. So a much more dynamic set of resources, both at the customer side and on the utility level. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's some real interest in moving towards hydrogen and potentially as a replacement of natural gas in certain areas. So we're looking for that development. And as a side note, relative to Enel has thermal power plants around the world. They're moving towards closing down their coal facilities in Italy, which are expected to close by 2025, and accelerating that timeline to 2021. And then this, replacing some of that thermal generation with hydrogen. So I think there's some real world examples of how that's coming to play. We still have some headwinds. It's not easy. And some of those headwinds include things that I call regulatory friction, permitting, getting energy storage permitted, lots of various local requirements, sometimes having some kind of state level requirement would be helpful, but trying to streamline the permitting process so you can bring these resources online more quickly. Interconnection, again, connecting to utility systems, connecting to transmission systems, trying to get the interconnection process a little bit more streamlined so it doesn't take months and months and months and cost lots and lots of money. There should be a way to make this happen more easily. On the distributed energy resource side, we still have some friction in terms of customer engagement, customer access to these resources, recognition of performance and payment, all of which can be very complex and discourage customer participation. So we need to get the customer rules in line with what our state policy goals and objectives are, and make sure that they aren't hindering us moving forward. And cost effectiveness, these resources can do a lot of things now that they aren't necessarily getting credit for. So making sure that we're calculating and counting all of the value streams that these resources provide and give credit for that. And making sure that we're aligning incentives. This deals with utilities as well. So we have to be careful as we have more and more distributed resources to understand what the relationship of these resources are relative to the public utility and its mandates. So aligning utilities incentives with encouraging resource adoption at the customer level. And if we're not, I think that's something that we have to look at as well. So those are my comments for today. I look forward to the question and answer period, and really thank you for your attention.
Well, we're going to go to our next set of speakers. They're going to be our last session for the day. And all three speakers that I'm going to introduce are going to come up in sequence, but they're going to talk about something that affects us all right now, and that's the COVID virus. COVID virus, how it's changing our world and how it's changing our industry, and they're going to give you three different perspectives. So our first speaker is going to be John Pusker. He's PE. He's been practicing in the energy arena for nearly 40 years. His focus has been in industrial fuels, combustion, boilers, and steam systems. He's a licensed mechanical engineer in 6 states. He's co-author of AEE's Certified Industrial Energy Practitioner Program, and he's a CEM. Mr. Pusker has done more than 200 commercial and industrial energy audits over his career. The body of his energy-related work includes performance contracting with industrial clients on boilers and chillers and retrofits for all those. He's the founder of CEC Combustion Services. This firm provides risk management audits, training, retrofits, and gas hazards management in more than 30 countries around the world. He grew the firm from just being himself in the upstairs of his house to 43 people, over $10 million in annual sales before he sold the firm in 2011. After John finishes, our speaker will be Dr. Timothy Unruh. Dr. Unruh is the Executive Director of the National Association of Energy Services Companies, or NAESCO, as many of you know. In this role, he manages the representation of its member energy services companies. NAESCO provides advocacy for the industry at the federal, state, and local levels and provides member company accreditation. Prior to this role, Dr. Unruh was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Renewable Power at the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office of the U.S. Department of Energy. As the Deputy Assistant Secretary, he managed the nation's renewable power research while also providing oversight to the Grid Modernization Initiative. While at DOE, Dr. Unruh also directed the Federal Energy Management Program, or FEMP as we know it. Before he was part of the Department of Energy, he was the Director of Operations for Con Edison Solutions. We led a team of engineers and project managers to implement energy services projects within government and private institutions. Dr. Unruh is a licensed PE in multiple states across the U.S. and is a certified energy manager, as well as a leadership in environmental and energy design accreditation professional. Dr. Unruh has a doctorate, a master's, bachelor's degrees in electrical engineering from Wichita State University in Wichita, Kansas. Then our third speaker of this group, we've saved the best for last here, is going to be Paula Glover. She's the president and CEO of the American Association of Blacks in Energy. It's a national energy trade association that represents all sectors of the energy industry. She leads a 2,000-member association with 40 chapters nationwide. The association's focus is to represent the voice for African Americans and other minorities on energy policy, regulation, and environmental issues. Ms. Glover directs the association's strategic plan, business development, and policy positions. She represents the organization before energy industry executives and national and state policymakers. She is an industry thought leader for issues around diversity and inclusion. Her work on international energy issues underscores the importance of energy to improve the quality of life for people throughout the African continent. The association, under her leadership, has partnered with the U.S. Department of Energy on its Minorities in Energy initiative, as well as business development programming for minority entrepreneurs. She has also testified before Congress about the impact of policies on underserved communities. Ms. Glover has more than 25 years of experience in the energy industry, including 15 years in both electric and natural gas distribution companies. She's worked in those 25 years in government affairs, regulatory affairs, and economic development. She's served on several boards and councils, including the National Petroleum Council, where she was appointed by U.S. Secretary of Energy in 2014. 2017, she was voted on the board of directors for the Alliance to Save Energy. She's also a member of the advisory board for the Maryland Energy and Sustainability Center in the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. She received her BS in marketing from the University of Delaware. She's been a recipient of several awards, including the Bring It Home, the Hartford Award, the Clark Watson Chairman's Cup, and the Platinum Achievement Award from the Cooperative Development Energy Program at Fort Valley State University. With that, I'm going to invite the three of them to come up and join me to welcome these three as they talk to us about how COVID is going to impact us now and in the foreseeable future in what we do in our industry.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's event. The title of this presentation is Peering Over the Edge, the Realities and the Opportunities. I'm John Pushkar from Prescient Technical Services. I'll be coordinating this session. So for many of us, the past several months has been like peering over the edge of a cliff. I'm sure you can identify. We've seen some rather dark realities, including the virus, of course, civil unrest, unemployment that's been disrupting our lives. On the other hand, one could make the case that there are a number of opportunities that have and will come about, including new technologies for fighting infectious diseases, the acceleration of many digital technologies, and new ways to connect with people that, frankly, before the virus started, we had only just started to think about. We're going to take a look this morning over the edge from three different perspectives. I'm going to take you into a little piece of my world as an engineer, a service provider, an AEE member, give you a look at kind of the average Joe version of what I've been seeing over the edge. Then in a few minutes, we'll have two industry experts take a look at the current situation and future opportunities from the perspective of the energy industry as a whole, and from the perspective of organizations that support the energy industry, like our very own AEE. So for those of you who don't know me, once again, I'm John Pushkar. I'm a licensed professional engineer. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I've been an AEE member for over 30 years. I'm a CEM, and I helped write the current AEE Industrial Energy Practitioner course. I started a company in 1984 out of the upstairs of my house. I grew it to over 10 million a year in sales and sold it to a large multinational company in 2011. Today, I run a small consulting firm called Prescient Technical Services. When I look over the edge, I kind of see some things that I wonder about. Like, I wonder if everything I've learned as a person and professionally in practice over the last 40 years has kind of made me functionally obsolete. I wonder if you could relate to that. I'm sure many of you can. Personally, I used to travel 3 or 4 days a week for 25 years, popping in and out of industrial plants all over the world. Now that's not happening anytime soon. Clients that I've contacted don't want anyone coming to their facilities unless it's a very dire need. Another uncomfortable thing is that instead of spending time doing what I love, which is standing in some smelly, smoky industrial plant or chemical plant and looking at boilers or process ovens or furnaces, I now have to force myself to learn about new technologies like how to get into Zoom meetings, how to get into Microsoft team meetings, how to do webinars. One of the personal challenges I have today is developing and building professional relationships. Remember when this used to happen face to face, by having lunch or dinner with someone, by standing there looking at equipment, talking in a casual environment, observing body language? Now today, for the most part, it has to happen over a screen. I'm still learning about this and wondering how this is going to work really long term. There's also the issue of absorbing new technologies. There's new webinars just about every day about something. For me, frankly, it's kind of overwhelming, and there's only so many of those every day I can sit through. Then there's a side of me that focuses on staying sane. I'm thinking all of you need to consider a plan for this. I had to sit down and make a plan for this. I'm now disciplining myself to take time out of every day for hobbies, for working out, for de-stressing. I think you've got to find a kind of a mental health stay sane plan to really be effective these days. So part of my stay sane plan includes reconnecting with one of my old hobbies, which is restoring classic cars. I've hoarded over 40 old 64 to 66 Mustangs. I'm trying to restore, one every couple of months. I'm sure I'll never get to the end and my kids will be hauling them off to a scrapyard at some point, but at least I'll hope to get a fair number of them done before I have to leave the planet. On the physical side, I run every day. I do martial arts classes. I try to stay nimble. I distress with some rather unique YouTube channels that I found that I go to almost every day. I've developed a social bubble with some close friends. We have coffee every Saturday morning early in a Starbucks parking lot, socially distanced. It keeps us all in practice with actually looking at and interfacing with other humans. Other opportunities for me have been to develop new websites for my business, create content on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. I'm also forcing myself to learn new technologies. I try to learn about a new technology every week. These are things that, frankly, I may have no purpose for today, may have no need for even in months, but it's things that kind of keep me going and I think keep me relevant. So my latest new technology was to get a Ricoh 360-degree camera. I'm trying to learn about 3D photography. I'm hoping that I could maybe use this when I start to do training again for clients, taking 3D photographs of boiler rooms and the insides of furnaces and process ovens. So I'm also learning about iMovie for upping my game on content I'm putting out there on the web. And I've also spent time learning new mind mapping software. So there's a piece of technology software I found called Mind Genius. There's a lot of other ones, but that's worked well for me. It helps me gain insights into planning my life, planning projects, doing strategic plans. And of course, I'm also learning the entire world of social media. Frankly, if you've not started down that road, I've figured out I think you need to do that or you're just going to dry up and be completely irrelevant. So I'm spending time watching videos about how to get into the details and the finer points of LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube channels. I'm contacting people who I've seen that have made fantastic posts, and they've been kind enough to share information with me. So that's it. I hope a little bit of insight into my world gives you some ideas and helps spark some thoughts. Let me now hand this over to Tim Unruh, who'll give you a glimpse into the energy landscape through his lens. Tim, take it away.
Thanks, John, for that wonderful introduction. As we continue the theme, we talk about some of the changes that we've all experienced. We've all had some very interesting realities come in our lives of late. When it deals with the projects that we're working on and the buildings that we're all taking care of or working in, Construction projects, they've been delayed. It's clear that some projects that we thought were going to happen may not happen. We know that our maintenance budgets are underfunded. It's not just the maintenance budgets, but even the staffing budgets are challenging in these days. We're not quite sure how much money we'll have, who we'll have on staff, and when we'll be actually repopulating our buildings. When they get these people back in our buildings, some people might still be afraid to be in buildings. And so we might find our roles change, perhaps not just a maintenance person, but we might also be dealing with people's personal issues. Some people might be more susceptible to this outbreak than others. And so we have all these changes coming. Business development has stalled. People trying to develop new business can't find the people in the buildings to talk to. And so projects that we thought might be happening in the future are also going to be delayed. And our workers are asking questions about their future and their role. And we don't have the answers to those. Those are the realities that we live with. But as we look at those, we also see that there's a lot of opportunities that are out there. While our buildings are empty, many have taken the opportunity to catch up on maintenance. Now is a great time to have those contractors that you need to have in the building come in and get that work done. That can be done in a safe, efficient fashion. We know that contractors would like to do that work, and it's easiest and quickest and lowest cost to do the work when the buildings are empty. We know that the safety challenges in buildings are going to drive additional opportunities. And I have one here, Build Back Safe. Build Back Safe is one of the themes that we've been pushing. Overall, Build Back Better of the buildings is what the National Association for Energy Service Companies believes we should be doing. When we think about our buildings going back in and supplying more opportunities for changes to our buildings, safety is a big issue. When we think about safety, we think about the airflows and the way the air is going to have to change, or the way we control the airflow changes. When we think about the building control system, so many things will change. I know the ASHRAE is working very hard at coming up with some standards and some guidelines for us to follow when we come back into our buildings. And certainly when you're building a new building, all these new guidelines are simple to install because you just design them in. But when you're dealing with an environment that's already built, we all have challenges to figure out. But I think the innovation that we have and the opportunity with the advanced contractors we have will provide us the opportunity to come back and build back safe and make our buildings safer than they were before, giving people the assurance that when they're in the buildings that we know how to work and take care of them properly. Energy consumption is going to be important, and so I put build back efficient. It's something we've already been doing, but when we think about the safety challenges, we find that some of the safety challenges that we have to overcome are also affecting the energy consumption. One of the most common things I've heard is that we're going to supply 100% outside air into our buildings, or more outside air if not 100%. And as we think about that, we're challenged with the energy consumption that causes. So there'll be some design implications on how we balance the safety and the energy consumption to be the proper balance between the two. And then finally, our buildings are changing in how we want to use them. I think back when the dams break and there's flooding, people flock to public buildings for safety. They come to the high schools for shelter. If there's a storm or a hurricane, people come to public buildings for shelter. And so we need to build back resilience. We need to make sure that our public buildings, especially, are strong and able to withstand outside forces so that they're there for the people. And so again, building on it, we need buildings that are safe so that people feel comfortable being in them and that we do have safety considerations for how to protect them. We need to make sure that we do the energy efficient so that we're using our resources properly. And then we need to make sure that they're resilient and that they withstand the outside forces. And then finally, build back flexible. One of the things we found in the last few months was that we may need to change the use of a building for something different. I remember watching the news and how the Javits Center in New York City was changed into a hospital in just a few days. And it was not anything probably the designers of that building ever envisioned when they designed it, but yet build back flexible becomes another theme. It fits with the build back safe, build back efficient, build back resilient, and build back flexible, all a part of our vision of build back better. So as we go back and look at our new realities, we have the opportunity to build back better, and we'll be better from all the changes that we've made overall. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker.
Good afternoon. So when we're talking about industry and associations and nonprofits, there are several realities that we need to keep in mind. First, people everywhere, including the energy industry, are losing their jobs. So there are so many folks who are at risk, not only those of us who work in this business, but quite frankly, our customers and vendors that we do business with who are in the same exact position. Second, there is less ability for us to interact face to face, ability for us to exchange information and for us to fellowship. And we've gotten so used to going to conferences, happy hours, all kinds of networking events. And now being not able to do that makes us stop and think about how do we connect in the future. Third, diversity, equity, and inclusion is moving to a priority position. The world that we live in today, particularly the events of the last several weeks, has made diversity, equity, inclusion top of mind for so many of our organizations. The fourth reality is that the way we do business will change. There's not longer a pre-COVID, then we have COVID, and then post-COVID will be the way it was before. Now, the way we do business is going to change forever, and that's something we're going to have to face and deal with. And finally, that technology can be the level setter. So no matter where you are, where your association is, we are having an opportunity now where technology allows us to catch up if we need to catch up, and quite frankly, even to slow down when we need to slow down. But what are the opportunities? Well, you have to understand the power of your network. Oftentimes, for those of us who work in associations, we're challenged to decide and to explain what our value proposition is. And we undervalue the network that we have, a network of people who have a specific level of expertise or varying levels of expertise. That network of people who are across multiple organizations, who hold different types of positions and who different types of work. But when you're thinking about individuals who may have lost their job, that network becomes incredibly invaluable. It is a way for us to help one another as members when we need to. It's a way for us to share opportunities that we know are occurring. It's a way for us to support one another when we need to be supporting one another. The network is invaluable, and we need to understand the power of our network. The next opportunity is that being alone together opens a door for creativity and innovation. Remember, we are alone, but we are together in this. And this is the best time for us to be creative and to be innovative. And particularly as we're talking about networking and how do we connect with one another, before this time, how many of us knew about a Zoom happy hour? How many of us were doing Zoom calls to connect with our family on a regular basis? Technology has really enabled us to think about the way that we connect and fellowship with one another very differently. Personally, for me, I'm enjoying Zoom happy hours. I like Zoom game nights, and we as an association have found creative ways to connect with our members, our leaders, our chapter leaders, so that while we are alone in our own houses, social distancing, doing what we need to do to stay safe, we are still together. Diversity, equity, and inclusion can address the inequities in our workplace, but we must respect the climb. It's easy in times of crisis to want to come up with a quick solution and the fast answer. But the truth of the matter is that to get diversity, equity, and inclusion right, we have to take the time that's required to do the really difficult work. That includes assessing what our own organizational culture is, understanding if we have some biases baked into our systems, figuring out how we're going to make our organizations the types of organizations that we want to have, how we're going to welcome in new employees, how are we going to be safe places for the employees who already work with us. All of that is part of what I describe as the climb. And that now is what we have to do before anything else. But while we're home, let's take the time to plan and then follow through. One of the things that I got out of this experience over the last several months is not only that I have a team who is coming up with some really creative ideas of things that we could be doing, but that we have time now to plan those out. That not just throwing up an idea and running with it, but planning it, planning for things that we didn't expect to happen, being able to adjust when we need to be able to adjust, maybe even taking a little bit of risk on occasion. But this is the time and the opportunity that we have to do that. And what I'm saying is that as an association, there's no better time to do that than today, and that we will see the rewards of that work. And finally, there's an app for that. In our weekly meetings with my team, whenever we have a good idea, someone is always saying, I wonder if we could figure out how to do X. And I always think, well, you ask the Google, you'll probably figure it out, because there is an app for just about anything. Do you want to have your own avatar? There's an app for that. Do you want to develop a podcast? There's an app for that. There's an app for just about anything. Technology is our best friend. And if you recall, when I said that the reality is that technology can be a level setter, this is exactly what I mean. That looking at technology as an opportunity to do more with less is where we are. And there's an app for us to even do that. And so for me, those are the realities and the opportunities in this new world. Thank you.
We're hoping that some of these perspectives can somehow support you on your journey into the future. But before we get too far into the future, I want to remind you all that we frankly peered over the edge many times in the course of our civilization. So remember a horrible thing we had a little while ago called polio? We've peered over the edge at polio. Instead of ventilators, at one time we were worrying about iron lungs. And I want to remind you that this polio epidemic came at the same time we were also experiencing World War II. Through the course of this, we had the Iceman delivering ice. It was a wonderful thing when we got that new load of ice and we can load up the ice box with new groceries. So during the course of World War II, during the course of polio, even though these things were going on, new technologies kept forging ahead, and we ended up with modern refrigeration. Frankly, we've peered over the edge some in my lifetime. Back in 1981, I graduated from Youngstown State University with my engineering degree. My first job was for Standard Oil of Ohio. We discovered the Alaska pipeline, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it was really a big deal. The world, it was perceived, was running out of energy. The Alaska pipeline allowed us to tap huge reserves out of Prudhoe Bay in Alaska. When I was in meetings in corporate engineering, we looked at graphs like this that showed natural gas was headed to like $20 a million BTUs. Yeah, believe it or not, there were gas utilities here in the United States that would want you to have a credit check before they'd hook you up and allow you to have service in the wintertime. So as we peered over that edge, look what's happened today. Through fracking and other technologies, we've now got natural gas at less than 10% of that. I think I saw $1.68 a million BTUs the other day. We've gone from incandescent lamps to LEDs. So quite frankly, peering over the edge has not resulted in anything terrible for us. There have been those amongst us, like Al Tuman, who peered over the edge, also in the late 70s, early 80s, when I was getting out of college. Al peered over the edge and had the insight to see an opportunity to create an organization like AEE that would serve as the foundation for over 30,000 people today to serve the energy industry through marvelous new energy conservation technologies and to do countless good for the world and society as we know it. So although there's a lot of scary over the edge realities out there today, I think we're headed to some exciting places. Just as nothing stopped from technology when polio and tuberculosis were around, nothing's going to stop artificial intelligence, renewable energies, and I think overall we're headed for a bright, sunshiny future. So I want to thank AEE for putting this conference together. I want to thank the previous speakers that were part of this presentation. I appreciate the chance for this fellowship that we've had and all of us being allowed to express our views and come together as an organization to enhance the causes of energy conservation everywhere. And thank you again for sharing this little bit of time with me.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Al, and thanks to all the speakers for our closing plenary this afternoon. I'd like to really thank everyone who's made this inaugural AEE West Virtual Energy Conference and Expo a huge success. All of the attendees, the speakers, all of our exhibitors in the virtual expo hall, and of course, our sponsors. I'd like to give special recognition to both Puget Sound Energy and Seattle City Light as our co-host for AEE West this year. They've both been involved with our West Coast events for many years, and we want to thank them for their support. Our bronze sponsors, Snohomish County PUD and Tacoma Power, for their ongoing continued support and involvement. And a final thank you to the AEE staff. I've received tremendous feedback and comments about this event, about how good it was, how everything was seamless, how well it went, productivity. And I owe all that, we owe all that to the AEE staff who does tremendous things on a daily basis. So to everyone on the AEE team, I'm honored to be part of the team, and thank you for making this such a tremendous event. So, I hope you learned something this week. Hopefully you met someone new. Hopefully you found a new product or service during the virtual expo, and hope you had some fun along the way. I'd like to remind everyone that the technical sessions for the past 3 days, the opening sessions, the plenaries, the technical concurrent conference sessions, those have been recorded and available for replay for the next 30 days. So simply go to the agenda, go to the live stream, and the session will replay for the next 30 days. So as we look ahead, what's in store for events in AEE for the remainder of 2020? Well, the first thing is I've heard multiple speakers, chairs mention AEE World, which was scheduled to be in person in Denver this year in September. Well, unfortunately, the Denver or the Colorado Convention Center is set up as an overflow hospital in response to the pandemic. It's going to remain closed until the end of 2020. So we're not able to meet in person for AEE World in Denver in September. So we're evaluating our options, and our options, they range from meeting in person later in the year to having a total virtual event or having a combination hybrid event. So we're making good progress. We expect within the next 2 weeks to have a decision and an announcement on AEE World. We were scheduled to have our first inaugural AEE Europe Energy Conference and Expo in Dublin, Ireland in October of this year. The Convention Center in Dublin is closed also for the remainder of the year, so we'll be pushing that back 1 year until next September in Dublin, Ireland. So as we look ahead to 2021, certainly we hope we'll be meeting in person again. AEE East will be in Boston in March. AEE West will be moving to Long Beach, California in May. We'll be in Dublin, Ireland in September for AEE Europe. And then next year, AEE World will be in person in October, beginning October 20th in New Orleans, Louisiana. We certainly hope we're going to be returning to Seattle, one of our favorites in the Pacific Northwest, to be in person for AEE West in 2022. And then we'll be closing out AEE World in 2022 for AEE's 45th anniversary. Actually, not closing out, but closing out the year in 2022. We'll be in September in 2022 in Atlanta for AEE World for AEE's 45th anniversary. So I want to once again thank everyone for attending, making this a tremendous success. And on behalf of the global AEE family, we wish you, your family, your associates a safe and a healthy time until we meet again. Thanks for your participation, and have a great remainder of 2020.